Note My Objection.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here.
So I feel like, sort of the goal of this podcast overall is to bring information to people on like important subjects that from people who actually know what they're talking about.
Okay.
And I feel like the world of sort of like human trafficking, child abuse, it's I don't know if it's just me, but it seems to be more prevalent, in the news cycles, sort of in the political realm. Like it's something that people are talking about more than they used to, which I think is a good thing that at least it's at the forefront. But I also think, as with many other topics, there's a lot of misconceptions, how things actually work. So maybe we can get into it just so we can introduce you and all your expertise. Yeah. So you started in the Suffolk County District Attorney's office.
Yeah, I'm happy to give a little bit of my bio
and so
to start.
the very first time I met you was when I was typing away in the grand
That's
jury.
right.
And you
That's
were,
right.
I think you were in child abuse at the time.
That's
okay.
right. Yep.
And did you want to go, so if for people who don't know, in the district attorney's office, you start in district court.
Correct.
And then you usually go up to either like a general unit, sometimes major felony, or a specialized unit.
That's right.
Was working with victims something kind of you always thought would be your path as a DA?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what was that based on?
I started working as a prosecutor in the Roxbury District Court and in the West Roxbury, I should say, division of the Boston Municipal Court.
Oh, you get in front of the wrong judge, so I'll tell you that.
Yes, exactly. And even then, I just, I became a lawyer. It sounds so naive to say this, but I really did become a lawyer and have the idea of going to law school because I really wanted to just help people.
Yep.
Well, it sounds so naive and idealistic when I say it at this point. It's true, though.
But you know what? But I think for a lot of us, it is true. That maybe we realize along the way we help people is not exactly the manner in which we thought. But but you are. So
yeah. Well, and I also think I do really respect. There's a lot of folks out there who have a much more sort of plotted path for themselves and a much more sort of narrowed and specific idea of what that could be. And for me, it was just very broad. I want to help people.
Yeah.
And I saw as I was in district court, domestic violence, what I, sort of understood and came to understand better, sort of outlines of, familial abuse and even exploitation. And so as I was building those skills in district court and getting, towards the point where I would be moved to, superior court and the position in the district attorney's office where you would, be in front of the grand jury and bring indictments and more serious cases, I knew I wanted to be on, as it's called, the 9th floor or where the special victims sort of cases really were. And so I really was, focused on that right at the beginning of my prosecutorial career.
Yep.
I was thinking I would be really just in the sexual assault and domestic violence division.
Yep. And that's in many DA's offices, there's sort of separate between, adult victims versus child victims. And this, usually prosecutors sort of take one versus the other, right?
Exactly. And so, and actually that was the path for me. I ended up doing a little bit of that, but I started in the child protection unit, child abuse, both sexual abuse and physical abuse of children. And it wasn't my plan. My plan was to start and doing the work with adults.
Interesting.
And when I started doing the work on behalf of children, I was just blown away by the amount of referrals that come in by the Department of Children and Families, which is the main way that law enforcement and district attorney's office are alerted to suspicions of abuse and neglect and make a determination of what can be prosecuted. And I really felt sort of like almost called. I really have to pay attention to this and so at the DA's office, I would say everything for the most part on the 9th floor. I did child abuse, adult sexual assault, and domestic violence as well.
And when you say like when you first came into the unit, was it the amount of one of the things I still remember from working in the grand jury, I mean, even before I was a lawyer, were how many cases there were in the child abuse unit. And it was very eye-opening for me because it's something that we don't talk about enough, and we don't talk about it a lot, and there's so much that comes with it, but it was very eye-opening for me to realize like, oh my goodness, this is far more prevalent and pervasive than any of us even think. And is that
And that's the tip of the iceberg,
Yeah,
right? Those are
yeah.
the cases that are
They
actually,
get to you.
yes, that we're in a position to, at that time, we're in a position to bring forward to a grand jury.
Right.
There's so many more that are just for one reason or another, or many reasons, you're not in a position to bring it forward to a prosecution.
Right.
It really is the tip of the iceberg.
And I think it's interesting you say that it's like almost like once you saw it, you felt like called to, because and I do think it takes a special kind of person to, I mean, I know you're a mom, and I don't think you were quite yet back then, but it's really difficult. Out of all the kinds of cases, I think they're the ones that I think you have to have sort of the most internal strength and fortitude.
I agree.
In watching all of you in that unit, I mean, it's amazing work that you all do. And so when even just going back to sort of at that level, what would a typical case, like how would it come into, because I imagine it's probably similar today, still sort of what the process is most of the time you think it comes through DCF. Is that like generally after a police call or someone, maybe the school, and then it's sort of what are the steps that it gets to you, and then how you make a decision about what happens next?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk through that. And what I just want to follow up on one thing you said, though, too. I think that, the idea that takes a special person, or, not everyone is sort of up for it. I think that actually is something I really always wanted to push back on for all of the prosecutors' offices, and the prosecutors in our office. People would think about child abuse and be so repulsed by it and be so upset by it, but not want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, right? Like I could never do that. I couldn't, that's such tough material. It's true. And so we need you.
Yes.
Like we need strong, smart, capable people to bring these hardest of cases. And I really always felt like frustrated that more prosecutors in particular didn't do that or take this on and they sort of, held it at arm's length for those reasons. But
and it is interesting, and I don't know how it is around the other counties, and maybe from your perspective, it was mostly women who were the prosecutors. Is that true even today?
I think so. I mean, I saw that across the state when I was doing the work in those units. But yeah, I mean,
the moms are the ones willing to take it on.
That's right. I think, the level of compassion that I think is required, anyone can access. But maybe you're right, that moms and women in particular maybe have, in general, a better ability to do that. And then, once you see it, sort of feel like you can't look away. Right. You have to pay attention to this and really tend to it. So, but in general, sort of how the process would begin is the Department of Children and Families, or Child Protective Services, as it's called in other states, is that agency within the state that gets notification of suspicions of child abuse, either sexual or physical abuse, or neglect. When anyone reports it to those to that entity, and in particular mandated reporters, right? So we're talking about teachers, coaches. There's a list of who those specific mandated reporters are, but most specifically we're thinking about teachers, right? And folks that have access to counselors, folks that have access to children and ability to see sort of what's going on in their lives. And then the law says, if you see something, you must say something, right? And so, but that means those folks are required by law. Anyone who has a suspicion of child abuse or neglect that they may
make a
observe, they can make a complaint to the Department of Children and Family, DCF, and that's called a 51A. That complaint is actually called a 51A because that's the statutory section that it's under, right? And so once a 51A is filed with DCF, whatever jurisdiction that complaint originates out of, there's a MOU, I believe, or basically sort of an understanding between the DCF, the prosecutor's office, and local law enforcement in general to sort of follow up on the jurisdictional path of the 51A, right? So the district attorney's office gets notice, the Boston police, if it's Boston, or a particular law enforcement, if it's not Boston. And then sort of initial assessments are made. Is there a level of credibility to support this at the initial outset? If it's supported, is there an investigation? And so from there, the process proceeds from the initial 51A filing to a coordinated with DCF investigation,
Right.
And including law enforcement or not, depending on the specifics of what that 51A filing contains. And so many times those initial complaints, if they, for instance, would include an allegation of sexual abuse of a minor, require, some further information, obviously, and an attempt to get maybe direct information from the subject child. So depending on the age of the child and what other factors may exist, oftentimes there would be what's called a forensic interview of the child.
And what does that mean? What's a forensic interview?
Yeah, so a forensic interview would be a very coordinated and specifically done interview of that child with a forensic interview, a forensic interviewer, a specifically trained professional to ask questions of that child in a non-leading way, to initially build a rapport, to try and ask questions about what's been flagged for the authorities as a point to understand better from this child's point of view. In the forensic interview, are listening to the interview, not part of the interview. The interview is just between the forensic interviewer and the subject child, sort of behind a mirror, or maybe the prosecutor, the law enforcement, the DCF investigator, folks that need to understand and make a determination of like what happened here, and if we can gather that information and understand that something happened here and what it is, what the next steps are exactly. So.
And how difficult is it even to, because I can imagine, once you get these complaints in, it must be difficult to, in many cases, to even get the family to agree to the children come. What are the difficulties that you see arise? So if there's a complaint made by, a teacher or a guidance counselor or something like that, do you see a lot of willingness from, the parents, the adults around them, or is there a lot of pushback? I mean, that must be sort of this kind of difficult push and pull.
Yeah, that is a good point. And I do think it was part of the process with DCF being involved is this push and pull with the families, as you describe. And so DCF, as this sort of arm of the government and Child Protective Services, would have a sort of a level of ability to maybe sort of leverage their position,
kind of force it.
Not always.
Bit. Force is the wrong word.
Yeah, I think that. Well, first of all, each scenario is different, and you never know.
It's difficult. I'm asking you a general question for.
But I would say, cases, in many instances, you're right. Maybe there'd be resistance by caretakers or parents for a number of reasons. Mistrust with law enforcement, bias in some other way, questions and concerns, and so they may be very concerned and want to hold back. And so a lot of work would be done to explain everything that's going on,
what the process looks like,
provide resources, and explain. Also, many caretakers and parents might be, hear a report and a concern and be scared and want to understand what's going on, and explaining the process that is proceeding here might help them realize that they can maybe get to the next step and understand if there's been someone who's perpetrated a harm against their child. Can they help in sort of getting to accessing justice or resources and support for their children that they really need to.
And do you think so? Once sort of you go through that process, and then there's and if you find that there's enough to launch a more formal investigation, to dig a little bit deeper, how difficult is it to, if you think there is something really there, to bring these cases, to bring charges against people, to bring them to trial? Is it difficult? Are these I always think of them as more, they're different than other kinds of criminal cases. They're not just, it's not just evidence-based necessarily. It's there's this more, I feel like, emotions and feelings wrapped up in it, and different kind of different factors than
That's
if
right.
you're prosecuting a gun case or a drug
Yeah.
case or a
Yeah.
murder or anything like that. What are some of the difficulties that you saw in prosecuting these types of cases and bringing them sort of through the process to an ultimate end?
Yeah. No, that's right. I think, one of the many reasons if we're talking about child abuse cases, and in particular child sexual abuse cases, why these are oftentimes the hardest, I think, to prosecute, is because as you just sort of honed in on, in many other, cases that are being indicted, there's tangible evidence outside of the person's story, right? There's, drugs that maybe have been located by the police. Exactly. There may be a firearm or a shell casing or other evidence, photographs to put forward to a jury, to a fact finder, to say, oh, right. Okay. So I see what we have here. But when we're talking about allegations of child sexual abuse, you're talking about, if we're talking about a trial, we're talking about a child having to get on the stand in a superior courtroom in front of, 16 strangers in the community, and maybe that child is 10, give or take, I mean, adults have a hard time doing that, and so, and we're talking about that child talking about the most horrific thing, shameful, not understood thing that's happened to them in their life, and trying to explain it to all those people, or at least tell their story. And, and maybe they've not told anyone for a long time because they didn't even know what was happening to them. They didn't understand it. They felt shame and all these compounding emotions. So now they have to explain why they didn't tell anyone.
Right. And that's used against them.
And that's used against them. And maybe there's things that, their family's no family is perfect, but they're, the issues in their family are going to be brought to light and used against them as well. And so there's a lot of reasons that it's very hard to bring these cases forward, let alone to trial. The whole weight of the case on maybe a child's shoulders. We try to alleviate that burden from them.
But that's the reality of those types of cases. And is there ever, when you're kind of taking all those factors into consideration, what weight, when we go to sort of the mental health of, like you said, if somebody's a child, and we all have to think about, you can say that, but you think about a little kid up on the stand testifying to these horrible things that happen to them. Is there ever an evaluation that there's going to be more harm to the child in putting them on the stand? And then what do we do in that situation? Because it's, we want somebody to be held responsible for the harms they've done, but do we want to further harm, what are those? How do you kind of work out those difficulties, I guess, in these types of cases?
That's right. I mean, that is exactly right. Those are part of the calculation along the path of the prosecution where, after the initial forensic interview, that's one disclosure, right? But that may not be the ultimate disclosure that's required of a criminal prosecution, right? And so understanding that a prosecutor along the path through grand jury, through the criminal system, through the, process of the case proceeding to an eventual trial date has to make that evaluation. And the process with child sexual abuse cases and child abuse cases in general, as I mentioned, but didn't name it specifically, there's this multidisciplinary team, right? So the prosecutor is working in conjunction with, specially trained law enforcement, a victim witness advocate, a family advocacy center in consultation with this group, this team, to try to understand as the path is moving forward, along prosecution, is there therapeutic resources available to support this child and family, possibly, and in what sort of position is this child in? Are they in a position to testify? Is there sort of psychiatric ability, or maybe that's not the right word, psychological sort of position
Yeah, and what it's going to do. So, because and that's why it is so difficult because, it takes into so many factors that we don't in other cases. And, most other criminal cases, we don't, we do take in, civilians or victims kind of perspectives or their feelings, but we're going to go, like a domestic violence case, you often find that, the victim is not on board. But if the government thinks they can prove it, they're going to, because they want to ensure, there's some sort of accountability for the allegations. But, I think it's different when you have children, because you're making those determinations about like, okay, what's the long-term mental health and well-being going to be for this child? And we don't want to be, we're here to help. So we don't want to, harm them more.
And you're also
so,
thinking about the, and as you point out, you're also thinking about the safety of the community, if this is a, alleged perpetrator that, you're worried about their future exposure to children or folks in the community. And you, sort of really need to be in a position to, figure out how to push forward on the prosecution. It's tough. You know, those calculations are not easy.
And let me ask, in terms of that, because we hear a lot about this like who's doing this kind of stuff, right? And obviously we know that it's not like the boogeyman, right? Mm-hmm. It's often people who look very normal and, live otherwise, regular lives and things like that. But do you find in your experience that most of the abuse of children happens, if it's, if we're talking about sexual abuse, that it's within, family, friends circle, or is there a lot of stranger stuff kind of happening, or is, for the most part, when you see victims and perpetrators, is it somebody who's close to them, known to them?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the idea that sort of the stranger in a van is going to pop out and grab a child and, abuse them. And certainly that happens, and that's horrible and scary and upsetting. But that is the outlier, I would say, in most, through my career and through the experiences that I've had in prosecuting cases, the sort of a Venn diagram of connections to the child are really sort of within those are where the, those perpetrators and alleged perpetrators are found, right? Family, friends, connections.
Yep. And so if you have a case of, like what are the, I guess maybe like as a community, you're just thinking sort of big picture, if you have a case that for whatever reasons that it's okay, we're not going to be able to put this kid on the stand. It's just going to, there is going to be more harm. They're not going to be able to withstand it. And so, but we otherwise think that, this is somebody who's a dangerous person. What are the steps, that are there steps, like, so say a case is essentially we're not going to go forward for whatever reasons, but you actually think that somebody did this. What do we do then? Like, are there, I sort of go back into the community, or is it,
Yeah, I think I would say this, to be clear, if you're indicting someone, right? If you're bringing a case through grand jury and you're bringing criminal indictments, then
you're ready to go. You
have to be in a position to try that case.
Yeah.
And really push forward to do so. And so it's really, I think, in my experience, I would say at least, it would be the sort of threshold of like, can we go through grand jury? What will we see on the other side of this?
Because it's so bad.
Right. Is it appropriate to do that? Yeah. And then not to say you never are making that calculation on the other side of grand jury if you have an indicted case.
You probably have already.
I think ethically, you really need to be doing that before you're in the trial track mode, right? And so, and I think in general, many prosecutors, I shouldn't speak for other prosecutors, I think that was my practice, right? So that's, but I think, that's unsettling.
That's the hard part,
if you've, from your position as prosecutor, reviewed material, you believe some really horrible things have happened, but for other factors you're considering in a potential investigation you're reviewing, you're not in a position to indict. That's just hard to live with. But it happens. It certainly happens.
That's the hard part of the job. And that's why, when I said, that I think that those of you who have, dedicated your lives to doing this kind of stuff, because there is that part of it that you just sort of have to know that there are people out there who are doing these things who are not being held accountable, So, so let me ask, so you were, when you were in the child abuse in the DA's office, that was mostly, sort of like one-on-one individual, instances of abuse, maybe we would say, versus when you started doing more human trafficking. What is the sort of like, what was the transition to that kind of work? And like, what do you see as maybe the, is there sort of a pipeline? Are they two separate? Are we thinking of them as one and the same, or are they two sort of different things?
So back when I was at the DA's office, it was around the time actually that the state level statute for trafficking was enacted, right? There's comprehensive legislation addressing human trafficking in Massachusetts. In 2011, it was enacted in 2012, meaning starting in 2012, we were able to bring on the state level state crimes of sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and sort of related crimes and legislation that address those issues, right? So part of that legislation included DCF and 51As allowing for screening in or sort of notices to be filed around sexual exploitation of children or suspected exploitation of children. And so I was in the DA's office at the time of that enactment. DA Conley was active in this area with My Life, My Choice and the Family Advocacy Center in Suffolk, being at the forefront of rolling out this MDT model, multidisciplinary teams, and trying to address suspicions of sex trafficking in minors in particular and exploitation. And so there was a unit that was set up to address this new 51A filing. It was the Human Trafficking and Exploitation Unit at the DA's office. I was the unit. I was the initial unit. It was just me, but it was great that they, set up a unit to address this as a sort of a newer concern. But it was new in some ways in that the statute was new and the designation was new, but what was
happening wasn't.
Exactly. Yeah. So the contents, if you will, sort of what the suspicions were and sort of what was happening in terms of suspicions of children being exploited and sexually abused by way of commercial sexual exploitation. That was not new, of course, right? And so, so I was working in that unit, sort of taking on those referrals and also referrals as it related to adult sexual exploitation. Adult victims, right? And so I was doing that at the DA's office for maybe about 2 years, less than 2 years, when I went over to the Attorney General's office.
And that's where you led the human trafficking.
Exactly. I led the human trafficking division at the Attorney General's office for about 5.5 years. Wow. And so went from doing the work of, sort of assessing and investigating trafficking, particularly for children in Suffolk County or minors, those under 18, to a statewide sort of
running investigation.
Looking at the
for sure.
Looking at the whole state, looking at all the different counties, looking at both referrals related to children, but really primarily at the AG's office as it related to adults. And so we did multi-jurisdictional indictments and investigations related to sex trafficking and labor trafficking when I was at the AG's office.
And do you find that in your experience that there is sort of a, when we hear a lot about, trafficking, human trafficking, child trafficking, and this, sort of this idea of like, it sounds all very like foreboding and scary, but what does it actually look like? So when we say, if we're talking about children first, maybe like, what does that actually look like? Does it mean that we have all these like large scale rings everywhere? Is it, what sort of meets the definition of trafficking of children?
Yes. So I would sort of back up to say, and we're talking about sex trafficking, right? We talk about labor trafficking as well, but in general, I think when folks think about human trafficking, they naturally think about sex trafficking. I think anything that refers to sex is like headline grabbing and flashy, and folks are going to sort of hone in on that. So when folks are thinking about sex trafficking in
Yep.
general, I want to sort of clarify that there's a number of things to talk about.
Yeah,
Right.
sure.
And also when we're talking about prosecutions, we're talking that we can have prosecutions on the federal level, right?
Yeah.
Where the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI or the Department of Homeland Security are involved in investigations that may be across
Really
the
wide
nation,
scale.
maybe
Yeah.
multinational, large scale in that way, and addressed under the federal code, which requires, commercial exploitation, sexual commercial exploitation of individuals, adults,
Yep.
requiring force, fraud, or coercion,
Okay.
as the statute for the federal law requires, or a minor.
Yep.
The state level statute for sex trafficking is a little bit, I guess you could say, broader, in that it basically says, if there's knowing facilitation of commercial sexual activity,
Yep.
that may be something to be prosecuted under the sex trafficking statute.
Okay.
And so it does not have a requirement of force, fraud, or coercion.
Okay.
And there's been appeals and sort of case law
Yep.
around that question of force, fraud, or coercion.
Yep.
And we can talk about that. But it basically saying if someone is involved in the knowing, harboring, recruiting, enticement, subjecting, obtaining, I think those are most of the action verbs of the state statute, of another person, of their sexual, of their commercial sexual activity, they
That's
may be
enough.
liable for sex trafficking. All right. And so when we're talking, on the state level, there's a number of different scenarios that I've prosecuted, and I've been part of prosecutions, or I'm aware of other prosecutions that sort of fall into sort of different types of scenarios of what
Yep.
that may look like. In general, there's, what we would see as sort of brothel type situations where someone who's organized basically a sort of a ring of houses or
Yep.
residential type locations where, sex workers, essentially, as they would call them, they have them, set up and available for commercial sexual
Yep.
activity, right?
Right.
And, sex buyers going to those locations, accessing those individuals at those locations for commercial sex, paying. And so that sort of situation, that's frequently prosecuted under the
Yep.
state statute for sex trafficking.
Right.
We'd also see cases of, a number of different things that, where you have minors that are sort of enticed online and sort of brought along with maybe a particular trafficker with one or several other young people to sort of be available online for situational commercial sex and or, producing live commercial sex acts or, the like.
And do you find that most of it is, is it sort of, is it highly organized, or is a lot of this sort of like roughshod thrown together? Or
Both.
does it
really?
a little
I mean,
bit of both?
from what I've
Runs the
seen
gamut.
and it really does. Yeah.
That's
And I've
interesting.
seen, at the AG's office, prosecutions sort of across the state, literally, of a connected organization, and also, seen in individual jurisdictions, right?
Yeah.
Sort of, an individual trafficker working, if you will, right? And gathering a number of folks to, work with him or under them.
And do you find that, so say if we're, thinking about within Massachusetts, I imagine they're targeting, young, probably mostly women, but I'm sure there's, young boys as well, that, are maybe runaways that no one's paying attention to. Is that sort of the pipeline that we see about how, like how are, how is it, if I think about sometimes it's like just, okay, if you have sort of all these young say we have young women sort of in this system, where is everybody? Where are all their parents? Where are so they're targeting kids who nobody's really paying attention to. I mean,
well, I would say yes and yes, right? I think, My Life, My Choice is a wonderful organization focused on particularly the suspicions of commercial sexual activity related to minors and suspected exploitation of minors. And so, they have done fantastic trainings throughout the years. They still do them. And I can think about the trainings that I've gone through with them where they talk about the idea that sort of, being in a position to have influence and power over someone, right, requires you many times, not always, but sometimes to be in a position to sort of access vulnerabilities of that other person, right? Yep. And so, is that person young, impressionable, maybe insecure, maybe have some other sort of vulnerability in their life? Like, really, the description is maybe any teenager,
right, right,
or anyone, access to, online, and sort of non-protected, sort of in some ways. I don't say that, and I don't think My Life, My Choice would say that to scare everyone about, just teenagers sort of being out in the world, but just to really highlight and say, yes, it's true that folks being filed for under DCF suspicion of commercial exploitation and maybe having like no guardians in their life or lack of oversight are particularly vulnerable, right? Having
but
like lack of structure in their families or no families or maybe a history of some other trauma or some other mental health, concerns in their past. Particular vulnerabilities are very there and exposed. Yep. But it's true also that sort of maybe just any self-conscious teenager might be sort of susceptible to some, person saying, "Hey, you look good. Right. Why don't you come with me? And let's take your picture." Yep. And then that's a sort of a slippery slope for a young, maybe just, not for lack of a better word, ignorant young person who just is like, looking for love or looking for like affirmation. And so, yes. And
they know, and that's, and that's the sell for, a lot of these, I assume a lot of these people is that, that it is, I'm sure there is a sort of, think about how to say that, but like if you are in that place and you're not necessarily a runaway but you're having a hard time and maybe not, maybe things aren't going as well in school as that hey, maybe this looks a little enticing or different or, and it's not, I'm sure it doesn't always start out that, we're not just taking kids, putting them in vans and saying like, we're going to sell you for sex now, that it's sort of this,
I think that's very few and far between. Not that it doesn't ever happen, but that's very few and far between. And you're right. Like, I think that, vulnerabilities that sort of could expose anyone to being sort of exploitation. It's really available, especially for young people, right? And
I think too, like especially like you were saying with the invention of the internet and everything that comes with it. I mean, I have, it's something that I'm particularly concerned about, and obviously with young kids and sort of what is out there on the internet, and how often we see this happening, different platforms, different, games kids are playing, that there's all kinds of predators who are sort of lurking and really are able to, like capture some of these kids because, they create relationships with them and talking and back and forth and all that kind of stuff. So I think that the dangers of the internet just add sort of an extra layer or really maybe another way for these, these individuals to sort of like find a way into some of them.
Right. No, and I think that like, I don't want to be in a position of always sort of being sort of scared, and I want us to be sort of available to, evolve with the world and the internet, and sort of, there are sort of wonderful things that access online provides for us. But I think that's right. That sort of like, if we're not sort of tuned in to sort of, maybe the other side of the screen.
I'm an internet alarmist. I'm concerned about all this. You pay attention to all like the Roblox stuff.
Right.
And,
I think we need to be paying attention. And so I know my position is I think, I want my kids to sort of be aware and educated as they're sort of using these tools. They're not going away. They're only proliferating. So we need to be aware, and we need to be building relationships with our children to the best that we can.
Yep.
To just allow them to talk to us and to alert them, like, okay, if something's up, like you got to talk to us. You got or you have to find your person you can talk to. And so I think I say that too because I think alarmist is, we could all be alarmist, and I think maybe we all should be, but also alarmists, we have to breed conversations like you're doing, right? Like, and I think if we just shut everything down and are alarmist about everything, then sort of the reaction to that is
I know
maybe not so good.
I'm always prefacing everything. I'm like, you have to listen. I know it sounds, but I do think, it's, have you read that, The Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt?
Yes. Yeah.
And
and you have a graphic novel for kids out now.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. I think it's called The Awesome Generation. And some of my friends have had their kids read it already, and I need to buy it. But yeah, I've heard it's good.
I think it's, I think he's doing a really good job because it's,
yes,
I have not seen any sort of, it's the fastest I've really seen like a grassroots movement have actual, change because, you look at even just how many states across the country taking phones outside of school, out of school and learning and things like that. And I really like how he sort of explains, he's like, we've taught kids to be afraid of the real world and not afraid of the online world at all. And, and I think for many of us, especially in the criminal justice system, I'm like, there's definitely scary stuff in the real world. Yeah. Probably scarier stuff in the online world. And so that we have sort of like no, even just as many suits are in litigation with Roblox alone and stuff on Snapchat and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's, I think parents are starting to, there's sort of a gap where I think many just didn't know of these realities and the concerns. And so I do think there is, sort of a movement towards that, but you have to talk about, my Grace is 9, so I don't quite talk about it with Joseph yet, but we're pretty, strict with what we allow. And I explained it to her that, hey, mom works in a world where I can see all of the bad stuff that happens. And so these are the reasons, why. And I think you have to be open, you have to be honest, and you have to have that sort of line of communication with kids because, like you said, you could be, a 14-year-old girl that's just, having a tough time in school and maybe not fitting in and feeling a little vulnerable. And if you don't have that sort of, okay, I can go to mom and dad, even though I'm uncomfortable, you are more susceptible to, whether it's online persuasion or if it's somebody in the real world. And, so I think that sort of at home is a big part of all of this.
I think that's right. I think, I remember even 10 years ago thinking about just what you sort of were outlining, that we are so protective of our children. They don't even walk down the street by themselves. Right. I used to do that as a kid, but we hand them tablets, and that is the Wild West.
Yeah, I know.
It is the Wild West.
It's like,
I think you can just literally type something in and be viewing pornography within seconds. Yeah. And that, thinking about that is just mind blowing. And I did, work in the child protection unit for years and years, and thinking about child pornography and sort of the proliferation of that. But we're seeing, that was on the dark web, and so there was like a layer of hiddenness in some way to the in particular the child pornography, right? And so those nefarious actors were at least sort of hidden it in some way, but now
I know
it's really not.
Everything's just out there,
and it is really unsettling. And I think something that I think you're right in that maybe we're onto something, and that we're sort of starting to sort of grassroots people themselves and the generation that's coming up is saying like, this was too much at a young age, and we were exposed to so much, and no. But it is still true that, phones are the currencies of our lives, and everything is online. Chatter, constantly sending messages all the time. Pictures are constantly, photos. And so I wanted to sort of bring up an area of work that I'm doing now that we're focusing on and trying to expand as a practice because it is prolific. And I feel like it's another realm we're sort of at the tip of the iceberg where I'm talking about non-consensual image abuse or the sharing of illicit images or sexually private images of an individual by another. And so it's unfortunately everywhere now too, I think.
Well, it's funny because I remember, so I was in Dorchester from 2014 to 2017, and a colleague of mine had a case, and they called it Gamergate. It was like it was like I'm going to get some of this wrong, so, but it was basically like in the sort of this gaming world, right? And there was a relationship between two individuals, I mean, a consensual relationship, and then went wrong. And he was releasing, pictures of her and sending, people after her and all those kinds of things. And at the time, I remember the prosecutor was trying so hard, and there was no real, there was like nothing to stick. And all of us were like, how can there be nothing to do here? You know what I mean? How can there be nothing to do at all? Like, this seems crazy. And since then, we have just seen so much, like the proliferation of sharing of images. I mean, you just see it all the time without consequence. That's right. And, I mean, and even sort of a step further, what I worry about now is AI, that you can take a picture of me and make me naked. And
that's right.
Even if it's not me, that's still going to, I mean, you're still going to feel like it's my body and everyone's looking at it. And so can you explain a little bit about how sort of the law has changed? Because I think that's the difficulty with the internet too, is that the law is slow. It's not only slow to, enact, but then it's slow to figure out, okay, how do we enforce this and figure it out? And then it almost feels like by the time we figure it out, it's like, phew, technology has gone past us.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
So what are we doing about that?
Yeah. Well, as you've described, the law is slow to catch up to what the reality of the world is, but we have in Massachusetts gotten a little bit caught up. Maybe that's not the right word, but at least then in 2024, the criminal harassment statute was updated to account for what you just described in Gamergate, or what is maybe colloquially called revenge porn, which is that sharing of sexually private images or illicit images of a person that may have been consensually taken by that person or even given to an intimate partner. But that consent for a picture to be taken did not include the publication or distribution outside of that person, right? And so the criminal harassment statute has accounted for any activity that we just described there, sort of the publication and the widespread dissemination of a sexually private photo of an individual. And it specifically states in the statute, because, if there was consent to have taken the photo, that doesn't mean that there was there's consent to the publication or further dissemination of it. So there's a criminal law that we have on the books now. The 209A also has been, that's the restraining order statute, has been updated to account for and include this as an avenue to get relief under 209A as well, under the restraining order statute. And that's, I think I was telling you, I've been in court a number of times where I've seen individual plaintiffs requesting a relief for, based on this revenge porn activity that's happened in their life by an intimate partner. And so, but I will say also that we have a number of cases that we're working on, clients that have come to us looking for what can be done. And law enforcement is slow to catch up to this. I think many of them don't quite realize that the statute has changed and updated. They don't realize that carve out that says even if you participated in taking a picture of yourself, you didn't agree to it be published.
It's very different. I mean, we and everybody understands that people do things when you're in the comfort of oftentimes
Right.
it's not just random people and random pictures.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's someone who you were in a real relationship
right.
with. You probably loved them at some
Right.
point. Everything was good. Everything was fine.
Right.
It is what
Right.
it is. It's something that a lot of people do,
Yep.
whether that's a
Right.
good thing or not.
Right.
And then what happens is then the relationship ends
Yeah.
badly. And I mean, to do something that is, I mean, it's just so harmful. It's so harmful.
It's
And
awful.
I mean, it's cruel. I mean, it's
so-
just like cruel beyond belief.
It really is.
To put, because the internet is forever, right? And I think that's probably the most difficult part is, if you're somebody who has had your private pictures shared everywhere, I mean, how difficult is it to get them off of the internet?
It can feel devastating, and there are things that can be done. There's a way to report it to the FBI if there's activity that's happening in the cyber world, as it's called. It's report to IC3. We recommend that immediately, as well as there's a way to sort of.
What is IC3?
IC3 is the FBI's cybercrime
Okay.
reporting system,
Yep.
and it's that is the website ic3.com.
So like if you were a victim of that, that's the first
Report.
person you report.
I would say I would say call the police.
Yes. Yep.
Try to get a report.
Yep.
Even if they don't quite understand, try and get a
Yep.
report going.
Yep.
I would say look at IC3 and see if you can make a report through IC3.
Yep.
There's also a way to make a letter known to the entity or the forum that is posting or where the illicit
Whoever's, like,
pictures
hold-
posted it.
yeah.
Because all these
whatever
ridiculous
platform.
porn platforms are still subject to copyright laws. And so there's a takedown letter that can be sent to the forum to say, I did not consent to my photo being taken or posted, to take it down immediately. And that can be effective. But you're right, the proliferation can be another level of devastation to survivors. And there's also an avenue of federal civil relief that we've been trying to focus on for survivors as well.
And and I think too, because I have to say there's, again, doing this kind of work, because it's not, listen, lots of lawyers, there's cases you take because there's certainty of money on the other end. And I'm sure with some of these types of cases, you could bring a civil suit. Maybe there is not that, the likelihood of recovery of huge amount of damages, depending on who the person on the other end is and whether they're ever going to be able to do that. But it's so important to pursue them because of the principle of them and to hold people, because even if obviously monetary damages are always helpful if you can get them, but even
not
if
always attainable.
And so,
that's right.
But to hold, you want to hold people, and that's how we do it. It's how do we deter this from happening, and continuing to happen by saying like, if you do this, you're going to have real consequences.
Yes. Yeah.
And so do you see a lot of people outside of the restraining orders? Do you see a lot of prosecutions of?
So I would be curious to find that out. Mm-hmm. I would like to sort of maybe purview the DA's offices and find out. I've tried to reach out to law enforcement, on behalf of survivors that we're working with to sort of just say, in a friendly way, like, hey, this is going on, and we really need some help here. I think, and I think it's another area where this is, I would just say, sort of internet-based exploitation of individuals. It can happen in a number of different ways. Like I said, sort of colloquially called, I have trouble with that word, colloquially called revenge porn. It's a tough one. Revenge porn, but, we also have sort of a number of scenarios we've been aware of and or working with where there's hacking, where people might have intimate photos on their own private phone or their own private Snapchat folder, and they've been hacked.
Right.
And there's actually a recent case that the U.S. Attorney's Office did here out of Boston, and I think I sent it to you, where there's a Illinois man and a Northeastern coach that were both sort of like part of this nefarious Snapchat hacking, and it's just a horrible case.
And you know what? It's also too, I think that as humans, we like to think the best of other people, and I think it's hard because you learning about sort of how commonplace this stuff is and how often it happens. You know, it's like this is really just like nasty, cruel stuff that people are doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And for what? For your you know, personal pleasure to you know what I mean, to really create such harm for individuals that oftentimes, you know, I mean, I can't even imagine as a victim having all of my, you know, my body shared everywhere, and then not really having a ton of remedy. And when you do have it, it's difficult. I mean, I'm sure, like you said, you know, it's a fairly new area, but you know, the police are just catching up to it. And so I'm sure as somebody, you know, if you have this happen, it's like, where do I go?
Yeah.
What do I do? You know?
Yeah. No, it's so alarming. And as I mentioned, those are some of the first steps I would suggest, right? Calling the police, filing IC3, trying to bring, you know, a takedown request, depending on sort of the nuances of each individual scenario. I'd make other recommendations, but I think it's really unsettling. And I think it's another area where you're right. I think people can sort of feel comfortable, or like, maybe that won't happen to me. And maybe this is something that just happens to other people that sort of, you know, do weird, kinky things. But I'd say people have to be wary and understand that this is happening, and especially with the younger generation. I feel like such an old person saying that, but it's really true. I think anyone maybe 30 and younger would say that this is just sort of, sharing intimate images is maybe part of like relational dating these days, and that is, if that is what it is, then there are things people need to be wary of. And, you know, you think you can trust someone and know them as you're dating them, and, you know, things may take a turn and you don't know the person that you were just dating. And that's really something.
And going back to, you know, talking to your own children about it. And like I said, you know, my oldest is only 9, but I mean, I'm a very open sort of book, and I say things. I'm like, hey, listen, there might be boys or somebody on the internet or this and that, and like, they'll ask for pictures of, you know, your boobs or this and that, and you think because you know, we know as a juvenile, your brain's not developed, you don't understand the consequences, and so I think it's, you know, I really do, particularly with the stuff online, it's so important for parents to understand that, like, they're difficult conversations.
Absolutely
you have to
right.
have them. Like, you have to have
this
them.
is happening at middle school. Like this is happening at middle school. I mean, we're talking. I'm dealing with adult survivors because these are people that are able to call my. But I know, because I have a middle schooler also. It's happening at middle school. And so you're right to be talking to your 9-year-old about it. You know, 10-year-old. My 10-year-olds are like, they have phones. They're sharing images. They're even doing, you know, the deep fake and the IA sort of, but or even just trying to entice and solicit images of each other. And you're right, they're all kids, but at the same, like, this is the internet. Everything lives forever. And so
and you have on top of that, you have, you know, the we've seen a lot of recently, like over the last year or so, this sort of like sextortion stuff for kids, where they think it's somebody, you know, kind of normal on the other end, and they say like, oh, take a picture of, you know, your penis or your, you know, vagina or boob, this and that, and then they say like, oh, well, we're gonna send it to your entire school unless you give this. And we have documented instances of 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds taking their own lives because now they have private pictures of themselves. They don't want to go to their parents. They don't know what to do. And because, you know, their brains can't process that, they're making these split decisions. So it's the, you know, and not to say that, again, not to be alarmist, but everyone is susceptible to that. You know, it's not, it's, I think we all as parents like to think like, well, what not my kid or whatnot, but I do think we live in such a sort of, I think online is a dangerous world. So if you're going to,
it's the Wild West. It's unregulated. It's not monitored.
There's no
it's
stock
true.
gaps.
That's right. And what I was saying earlier is that, you know, with the sort of having this nefarious activity around exploitation or sharing, you know, illicit images, particularly of child pornography, was sort of hidden away. You had to be on a certain server or dark web, and now you type in 3 letters, and anyone and everyone can see everything.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
pornography. Your children can see it. You know,
crazy.
someone else can post it there. It's
right. And I feel good because I talk a lot about it on. I am a prolific Instagram story sharer for anybody who follows me on there. But it's like all stuff that I'm always. This is sort of one of my main areas that I'm always like, because I have a lot of moms who follow me. And I'm like, listen, this is our job.
Yep.
You have to be
Good.
on top of this. Like this is really, really important because you just never know, and the consequences are so severe. It's not
That's
like,
right.
Maybe something's happening at school and we'll figure it out. These are the ramifications are so significant. So you just have to really,
that's right.
Be on top of it. But, I think that I just think it's one thing that is really sort of, it's funny because there's so much good that has come from, gaining more knowledge, having access to things. Yeah. But with that always comes sort of the downside. And I do think that now, having conversations like these and, talking to your kids about it and stuff like Jonathan Hype, just bringing sort of an awareness. It's that, like you said, the internet's not going away, right? It's not like we're going to rewind and go back to flip phones.
Right.
And although we got a landline. We
have
no
a
cell
landline
phones
too,
or anything like this. We got a landline for Christmas.
That's great.
And so, I think it's just about being aware.
Yeah.
And I think it's our responsibility as parents that like, this is, it used to be careful crossing the street, going to the store. You have to do, and send your kids back outside.
Right.
Let them play.
I know. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Let them go a little bit farther because, and that's the kind of stuff too, you think about. Those are the things where I was actually just watching a slideshow that Jonathan Hyde put on. It was like 10 years ago. And he had these old pictures of like playgrounds. Yeah. And they're all metal. And the kids are up like, 12 feet and could fall. And he's like, but they, that taught them, and then the playgrounds now, everything's like, the slides are this long, they're all plastic, and like make sure it's not wood chips so you don't get a splinter. And so what we've done is kind of sheltered our kids in the real world, and then they're online, and we were kind of taught, oh, that's okay, it's just fun games. And so I think that sort of bringing that to the forefront is something that's,
right, because
really
they need to build resilience, they need to build skills for themselves on how to deal with the challenge, how to figure some things out, how to know when they need to bring someone in to help them, right? And all of the real world challenges along the way help them understand they can do that. That's they can make decisions for themselves, and also that people make mistakes and we can recover from them.
So to pivot a little bit, I would love to just, not to get into, because there's a lot of, sort of politics that surrounds it, but have you been following all the Epstein stuff?
A little bit. Yeah. I feel like it's something I follow when I get an article. I see what's going on. Tell me the latest. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I think it's really interesting because, we obviously, it's sort of been this like, the elephant in the room that everyone's sort of known about, talked about, and now we're seeing so much more. And I think because it's so political, we're forgetting that like this is all about victims. With this 1,200 victims who have come forward, who have litigated have for years and years and years. And because now we just live in such a divisive country that depending on whether like your person's in it or not, we're making a decision, an assessment on the credibility of like whether this is even important to pay attention to. And there were 3 million documents released in the last dump, and there's supposed to be more because that's only half. But, I found it really interesting that coming from the Department of Justice, there was so much redaction of all of these arguably what we believe to be men's names, like in the emails with Epstein back and forth. And in this sort of statement that from the Department of Justice, that there's not going to be any prosecution. There's, nothing in there for charges. When we're seeing emails like, did you like the torture video? Your littlest girl was like cute last night. Oh, there's a Brazilian 8 years old. And I just wonder, it's so frustrating to me, like having this whole conversation about how pervasive this is. And not only is it, at local, small levels, these are like the upper echelon of our society. And for the government to say, well, we're kind of open and shut. Here you go. You have all your files.
Yeah.
Whether that, I mean, I'm feeling like it's really setting us back. I'm like,
Yeah,
you know
I
what
hear
I mean?
you.
Like, I'm
Yeah.
like, we have
Yeah.
waited all this time for,
Yeah.
you know, and I mean, it's interesting. It is really interesting to me to watch some of these, like what we sort of I would say the general public, including myself, thought of as like conspiracy theories.
Yep.
This like elite, like pedophile ring. I'm like, oh, I guess they were right, you
Yeah.
know? And then for it to come to fruition, and now it's almost like people like,
Right. Do we have to pay attention to that?
Yeah.
No, let's not.
you know?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting set of ideas there. I have a couple thoughts. I think, first of all, right, we have evolved in some ways, right, where we recognize, right, sex trafficking is out there, it's happening. I mean, I think we, the general public, right, don't recognize it maybe to the extent that someone who prosecuted it for years might, but still, there's much more recognition now in 2026 than there was in 2012 or 2016 or let alone 2000, the 1990s at all, right? Like even in the early 2000s, people were calling that child prostitutes was the term for someone who was a minor. Give me a break. Okay, that's child abuse. You can't be a prostitute. Okay, so anyways,
no, but it is like words matter.
Yes,
and that's what Josh and I were talking about this beforehand, because what you're hearing a lot of now is people like, well, they were 14, 15, they're not 6. I'm like, okay, like we're really reaching here.
Yes,
and there's almost like this. There is. It's like it's really weird. It's like this dichotomy between, there's something we all really care about, trafficking, abusive children, women, and then it's like, but do we? And then like all the blame and the shame goes on to the victims, and I'm like, and it just seems that is like, to me, that's the part we have to get over. That like somehow we still, like as a society, often seek to find like, well, what did the kid do, or what did the girl do? Like sort of assign some
power always
to
protects,
them.
and then the people that are in the position who have been exploited or victimized are always going to be in the hot seat and overanalyzed and held under a microscope. And that's always how it has been. And you're right, it continues to be. And I think, to the extent that there's been more light shed on victimization and exploitation, good, but we need to be consistent or at least constant in our examination of what is happening. And I think about like when Epstein years ago, right, things started to become more and more sort of obvious as it related to his unbelievable conduct and his prolific conduct, right? And that sweetheart deal that he got back down in Florida years and years ago, unbelievable. And there was a number of victims involved in that case. They weren't consulted at all. He got this incredible deal where he was on, supervised probation and like had jail on the weekends.
And he got them to, the one that he had to plead to was the oldest girl. She was 17. So then he got this plausible deniability argument to make to all of his. Oh, well, she was 17. I didn't know when he had all these other charges,
Right. But it spoke to me, like looking at it back then and even up until now, is sort of like it underlined everything you're saying now, where like the evaluation of the victim really sort of mattered most, more, especially sort of as the force of his immense power and connections. And, and that's really, as it related to how the prosecution of him resolved,
and to think
at least
too,
at that time.
To think too, it's like this sort of like, I think it was 2005. So it's like sort of pre-2005, post-2005. And so then when you were talking about the statute in Massachusetts, it's a little broader. If you're around it, involved in it, you have a little bit more culpability than maybe if, under the federal statute. But, there has to be some sort of, that's what's frustrating for me right now with the stuff going on. You have people who, we see a few people losing their jobs. It's not, we have the Department of Justice saying, no one's going to be investigated. I'm like, how can you have someone saying, oh, I liked the torture video? I'm like, you don't want to investigate that a little bit? Who's unredact the name?
Right.
Like, we can't do a little bit
Why are
further.
you
You can't bring all these people in for questioning. Like, of course we can if we want to. And then you have, individuals who are just like, oh, we're just going to lay low. But you know what? You knew at the very least after he was charged in 2005, and everybody knew, even if he only got that deal on the the one charge, everybody knew what ultimately was involved. And so to surround yourself, to stay in that world and be around, those kinds of people, that's what concerns me, is that there's this sort of like passive, just sort of, well, I don't know, he can get away with it. He has access to power and influence. And so if he, abuses little girls, that's his thing. You know what I mean? It's like that disturbs me as much as him doing it, that you have all these people that run the gamut, Democrat, Republican, across the board, who, I mean, this is like normal business. And so I hope there's some sort of, it's something that
there's got to be a reckoning.
About. Yes, I'm really hoping that there is some sort of reckoning and people are able to sort of like step out of their, the sort of ideological boxes and say like, remember, we should all be against this, And so
I agree with that. It should be unequivocal. Like it's just, right. You can't make a carve out for your political affiliation or someone who's in your political, that's just unacceptable. One way or another.
And I think they just, it's such an elite level of power, right? In group, like this is, that I think people, when they get into the circle, they're like, well, I don't want elite. I don't want to get, you know what I mean?
Right.
It is. It's like, well, I've worked all this, and now I'm at the tippity top of the people who make the decisions, and the rules don't apply to them.
Right.
And they don't have to follow the laws. And, you know what I mean? It's not just these kinds of crimes.
How do I stay here?
Crimes
I look the other way when this weird stuff's
happening,
or on this criminal stuff is happening.
And that's how it becomes, acceptable that, well, I'll look over here because I like everything else he has to offer. And those are the, you know what I mean? To me, I'm like, those are the people that need to have the consequences. Right. So, because if you don't have these circles, unless you have everybody else around you, allowing it, basically. Nobody around him was saying, this is what he's doing. Going to the authorities. Everyone's just either they're participating in it in some way, shape, or form, or they're just sort of passive enablers.
Like this is part of the deal. So I'm fine with it. Right?
Yeah. So I hope, I hope something more comes of it than, than it just like dying off, because I'm like, well, if it dies off, then we've all acknowledged that, like, and we've just basically said that it's okay for them to do that. And they're going to continue to do it if, you know what I mean? If there's no consequences. So, what do you, as we're wrapping up a little bit here, what do you think is there anything sort of like in this world that, you've been practicing in for so long, the sort of different aspects? Is there anything that you feel like the general public kind of misses about this topic in general? Do you think that it would be helpful for people, outside of, or maybe, bouncing off of what we've been talking about, that people need to know or need to hear?
Oh gosh, where to begin? We covered a lot though. Because we really went from, which I think is a natural evolution too, with the way that we covered a lot of sort of topics.
As you know, we could sit here for 6 hours and like get down to the nitty gritty. So I always try to like sort of bounce around and get at least a little bit of everything. But I think maybe sort of like it's like what we started with when I was in the grand jury. I have to tell you, so for people who don't know, when I was working in the grand jury and typing the indictments, everything would come in, like it was called a DI, a direct indictment. It would be like typed up with the facts and everything. And because I was in law school, I read every single one that came in. And I have to tell you, it had such a lasting impact on not only the volume, but the severity of some of the allegations. And, to think about, what what being a victim at such a young age, I mean, what is it, in your experience, what does it do to a person as they, like how so much to carry?
Yeah. I mean, I think so, right. To sort of talk through that a little bit more, I think, right. The level of insight that we have to sort of the appalling nature of abuse that is prevalent, or at least, there and not and just under the surface maybe in society is really upsetting. We need to be mindful and aware and have compassion for people. I think that, thinking about all the survivors that I've worked with, especially in my years as a child abuse prosecutor, I think about, so what is the impact for them on their lives? Right. I see a number of survivors who have been, first of all, I would say kids are resilient, and I'm so thankful for that. So many kids I've seen have the ability to learn, grow, be empowered through their experiences, but everyone is their own person. Trauma is real, and trauma, sort of like has effects on individuals in different ways and may sort of bear out in different ways. So obviously I can't speak for all of them and sort of what that looks like for their lives in perpetuity. But I think what I've learned in doing work on behalf of survivors through my career, right, as a prosecutor for many, many years and now in private practice is, survivors need to be listened to and sort of given compassion and understanding. Accountability looks different maybe for some people. Yep. Some folks, having a day in court and having a perpetrator tried and convicted is the end all be all and the appropriate way to deal with, a scenario. Yep. That's not the case for every survivor. Right. And also there are civil ways to help survivors. There's a number of different civil ways to address abuse or exploitation or harm that an individual has endured. And that can be a really helpful way to advocate for yourself or to feel empowered or to address our harms that you've, dealt with. And I feel very thankful and proud that that's part of what I'm doing now in my civil practice outside of being a prosecutor. That's also challenging in a lot of ways too. I mean, I think there's a lot that's involved there for survivors. So I would say, I would just tell survivors, listen to your heart. You are strong. You trust yourself. Look for help. There are people that want to help. Yep. You can find your way, and there's help to be had. I think that determining for yourself as a survivor what that looks like is, especially for adults who have things that they may be thinking about in their past or even their present. There's ways to address that in the legal realm and beyond, right? I think the legal realm is our world and maybe not the only world for people to deal with things. So therapy, other ways.
There are so many different avenues. And like you said, some people don't want to sit in a courtroom and don't want to go through that process that it might, for some people it might bring up more and almost be more re-traumatizing, or, you see a lot of people, I think, who, suffered themselves and then, into adulthood sort of give back in different ways. And I will tell you, there's I remember a case, it was Laura Montgomery, hopefully she won't mind me saying, but, and in it was a jury trial, and it was a young victim, and I think she was maybe like, I could be getting it wrong, but I think she was like early preteens by the time it went to trial, but was young. And it was a not guilty. But I remember that, I mean, it's like so vividly that, talking to Laura after and saying that, but, my job is to say like, but I believe you. So it doesn't matter. This is the law. This is the courtroom. Yeah. And I think, and I'm not somebody who's just like, you have to believe everything anyone says. There's always a process to vet things. Yeah. But I think if you are a victim, particularly of any kind of sexual abuse, whether you're an adult or whether you're a child, I mean, it's so deeply shameful and you feel all
Right.
these things. You know, I mean, that's the unfortunate part as a victim. You feel them.
That's
you know,
right.
why should I feel shameful?
right.
But I do. I'm
That's
the
right.
one who feels all of it and carries it. And I think it's so important to have people like you who believe those victims. And not only do you believe them, but are willing to go to bat for them, because oftentimes that's
Right.
I mean, oftentimes that's
Right.
just what people want.
Yep.
Is just, I want someone who will listen to me,
Yep.
who will understand what I went through, and they will do whatever they can. And obviously there are, you know, parameters with what you can do.
Right.
You know,
Right.
it's not
Right.
it's the list is not, you know, on and on, but it's, you're doing a really important work, and you've been doing it for a really long time. So I just want to say, you know, thank you, because I think there's a lot of people out in the world who probably don't have access to somebody like you. And so we need more, we need more people to be stepping up and doing that kind of stuff. So
agree.
I really
you.
commend you for not only, you know, because like you said in the beginning, you felt like once you sort of got into this space that it was a calling, and you've carried that throughout all different, even though you've been in different, you know, the DA's office, AGs, and private practice now, that you've been doing work on behalf of victims. So that's amazing. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time to come and chat with me. And let me ask, if people want to find you, if, you know, they have a case like this, they want to talk to you about it, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Reach out to me. Out to me. Call my office. Send me an email.
And where are you now?
My office is in Back Bay. I'm at Butters Brazilian LLP.
Yep.
We're right on Boylston Street in Back Bay. So I'm happy to talk to
and
folks.
I'll link for everybody. If anybody wants the information, I'll put it, you know, in the, you know, the explanation of the video and whatnot, so that anybody can reach out to you. So it was so good seeing you, and
too,
I'm
Catherine.
so glad you're doing so well, and I'm grateful that you were willing to come on and talk
this
to me
was
on Note My
awesome.
Objection.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
This was wonderful.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you like this episode, please comment, like, share, and subscribe. Every bit helps. Thanks for watching Note My Objection. See you next week.